Do you like music like this? Or this? How about this? Well, of course you do, you perky little kipper. That's why you're watching my utterly spiffing guide to light music. Part 4, Woodwinds. In this episode, we're going to wet our whistle with the glorious tones of the woodwind section. That's flutes, oboes, cor anglais, clarinets, bassoons, and Tasmanian tootie pipe. I'm joking, of course. There's no such thing as a cor anglais. We're going to broadly cover the main uses of woodwinds in a light music context. That's with counter melodies and interjections, voicing main melodies, and blending with other orchestral sections. To make this video more comprehensible, I'm going to start with some more simple examples and then build up to the more complex ones. Let's dive straight in with the use of woodwinds for counter melodies and interjections. This is where another section, most often strings, has the melody and the woodwinds work in a call and response manner or fill in the gaps with short little figures, both hallmarks of the light music sound. Starting simple, we're going to focus just on the flutes and how they interact with the string melody in Jack Cole's Joyride. I've noted the string melody and the broad harmony, but reduced that as much as possible so we can keep our microscope focusing on the woodwinds. Before even listening, the first thing to notice is where the flutes are placed. They're at the end of phrases where the strings hold sustained notes and are not playing over the top of the string melody. This is for obvious reasons. It's about creating the space in the orchestration for the sounds to be heard. It also feels symmetrical and logical as the flutes tie up the ends of the phrases and don't just appear willy-nilly and confuddle the flow of the all-important melody. Take a listen. Next, let's look at the flutes in A Lady in Love by Steve Breton. Even though the flutes are playing a much busier part, they're still finding the gaps where the string melody is playing sustained notes, so that you avoid the blurry texture of counter melodies happening over the top of main melodies, i.e. different rhythms on top of each other. The flutes are also high in the register so that they A. cut through the sound and B. contrast with the strings that are playing in the middle of the register. The flute harmonization is in thirds, and we've introduced the clarinets that simply double the main melody. Let's have a listen. Another little point here. The composer of this piece is Steve Breton, but that's a pseudonym of Trevor Duncan, who was a pseudonym of Leonard Trebleco. It's like 1950s Inception. We looked at High Heels by Trevor Duncan in the previous episode, and he used a harmonic move of E flat major to A minor 11, which is a sharp 4 minor in relation to the tonic. And in this piece, he's done exactly the same thing again, only in F major. Look, F major 7 to B minor 11. Tonic to sharp 4 minor. Pop that little move up your sleeve. Let's look at a full orchestration now that we're getting the hang of it. This is Angela Morley's A Canadian in Mayfair that I've featured several times in the past. We have some classic block chord writing going on with the pizzicato strings here, which we've covered back in episode 2. So how do our woodwinds fit in? Firstly, the flutes and oboes interject at the ends of phrases in the spaces where the strings are not playing, exactly the same technique as in the previous examples. It's also worth noting that in the final figure, the top flute part and bottom oboe part are an octave apart with the harmonies within. This is consistent with the block chord approach that this genre of music is famous for. The clarinets and bassoons are different, however. They enter 2 bars earlier than the flutes and oboes in each phrase and set them up with some sustained chords voiced in the lower register. This adds some warmth to the sound and contrasts the tight plucking of the strings. The longer note values, minims with the occasional crotchet, means that it's not rhythmically complex either, and this helps it sit with the very rhythmic strings. Have a listen. Let's look at one more example where the woodwinds are being employed with counter-melodies and interjections. Portrait of a Flirt by Robert Farnan. Again, we've got the full orchestration on view. In this example, the woodwinds are much busier, but only because the string melody is much more elongated rhythmically. This allows the space for the winds to show their strong suit, agility. The bassoon interestingly doubles the melody at all times, with the clarinet alternating between doubling the melody or working with the above flutes and oboes on the glissandi chords. Creates some great textures. Have a listen. Are you keeping up with this? Or are you falling behind like some sort of nincompoop? You're keeping up, aren't you? You witty little pudding. Excellent. So now we've got used to the idea of orchestrating your woodwinds to work around string melodies. But what about if you want the woodwinds to lead? Here's a starter for 10 from Running Off the Rails by Clive Richardson. Have a quick listen. The flutes and oboes take the melody, with the clarinets and bassoons working together to provide a very simple accompaniment. Take another listen. And now an example from Sidney Torch's On a Spring Note. The flutes, oboes and clarinets work together to play the melody in octaves. Dead simple. Take a listen. But the woodwinds don't have to play in octaves at all times. Here's a great example of passing the melody around the instruments for variation in Jack Strackey's In Party Mood. We start with flute and clarinet in octaves, pass to oboe, back to clarinet, and then hand over to the strings. The clarinet gives a very mellow and warm tone in this register, which gives a different character to the melody than that of the flutes, oboes, or strings. In the last 4 bars, the strings take the melody wholesale, and so the woodwinds switch back to those classic interjections we looked at earlier. And yet again, they only play when the strings are holding sustained notes as before. It's all about finding those spaces in the orchestration and playing your woodwind cards effectively. Take a listen. The woodwinds can also be orchestrated in a block chord manner, like we looked at back in episode 2. This gives a contrast to the stacked octave arranging of the melody. Here's an example from Clive Richardson's Melody on the Move. Don't let that melody get away. Let's get a little more complicated and look at a full woodwind orchestration, where we have combinations of melody and counter-melody. Have a quick listen. Pick piccolo, flute, and clarinet are stacked in 3 octaves, as we've seen in earlier arrangements. However, the second clarinet and bassoon work together with some flowing sustain parts in the lower register. The pitching and note values again mean that the second clarinet and bassoon get out of the way of the melody instruments above them and are engineered to sit into the arrangement. If their part was busier rhythmically or in the octave above, it would clash. Seems obvious, but it's easy to forget the simple rules. The oboes add some little interjections at the end of phrases, and that wraps it up nicely. Take a listen. Let's look at another one, this time Golden Arrow by Jack Beaver. Flutes, oboes, and clarinets are employed as Mr. Beaver must have had some sort of disagreement with the bassoonists. Perhaps they were laughing at his surname, although I'm one to talk. Take a listen. So the clarinets are taking the melody and harmonizing in thirds. The flutes respond with fast figures in the gaps at the end of phrases. Are you seeing a pattern? And the oboes join the flutes in their final figure to help it cut through. Notice how the rest of the orchestra is very restrained, which allows the mellow clarinets to soothe us at the mezzo forte dynamic. It's all about making that space. Listen again. The best way to get an understanding of this is to just keep looking at examples, and so here's yet another one. This is The Clockwork Clown by Edward White. The flutes take the melody and pass it back and forth in a call and response manner with the strings. The clarinets bring the interjections yet again at the end of phrases and when the melody instruments are holding sustained notes. We also have some staccato chords that are voiced across the oboes, clarinets, and bassoons before everybody ducks out of the way and the bassoons take the melody at the end. In your face, Jack Beaver, quipped the bassoonist. Well, this is exciting, isn't it? Makes you want to get out your oboe and have a good old play with it, eh? I've been playing with mine for most of the episode, in fact. The last thing I want to have a quick look at is the use of woodwinds as a colour, blending into the sound and doubling up with instruments from other sections, rather than playing distinctly different parts. Here's a section of Puffin Billy by Edward White. The flutes double the violin for some extra punctuation, and both the bassoons and clarinets double up with the cello at different points to make the parts more prominent. The flutes and violins work well together because they're both bright treble instruments that excel in the high range. The bassoons and the clarinets have a more mellow tone and can play in a similar range to the cello. When the clarinet is doubling the descending counter melody, it plays an octave above the cello, which helps stack the part and make it more clear. However, the clarinet is still quite mellow in that range and not too squeaky. The two blend perfectly. Have a listen. And another one, this time Holiday for Strings by David Rose. We have very thick extended harmony in the strings, which we've covered in previous episodes, and so the flutes and oboes double the melody and octaves to help that sing through rather than one of the harmony notes deceiving the ear. The clarinets add a fairly subtle harmony part to give extra colour and warmth, but it's kept simple because the string part is so lush and complex. Have a listen. It's quite difficult to hear the woodwinds in that example, but they're doing their job of reinforcing the melody so that it cuts through all their close-voiced harmony. Well, wasn't that fun? My oboe's all worn out after a good toot and needs to be wiped off and popped back in its case. Should probably put my cock away, too. We've been putting a composition together over the previous episodes, and I'm going to keep developing it as we go, and then we'll make a copy of the full score available in the final episode. I've used some of the techniques in this video to add some woodwinds. I've also added some very simple percussion just to bring a little bit of that in, and here's how it sounds so far. In our next episode, we're going to be looking at brass. Sorry, what? Oh, brass. Yeah. No, that would make more sense. But we've just been waffling on about 5-part harmony, extended chords, secondary dominance. I thought it might be fun to look at a... No, do you want me to go from the... Yep. In the next episode, we're going to be looking at brass. Pity's sake. If you've enjoyed this episode, please compliment me at the Rotary Club, or use your typewriter to comment below. Until next time, pip pip. Play us out, Mr. Duncan. There's a good chap.